I am Melanie, 67 years old, a retired nurse who never imagined my own son would strike me over something as trivial as unsalted soup. The bruises faded, but the emotional scars remain. After 40 years caring for others, I found myself trapped in my own son, Thomas's house, walking on eggshells, wondering when the next explosion would come. The journey from loving mother to victim of abuse happened so gradually. I barely noticed until it was almost too late. Before I share how this nightmare unfolded and the shocking moment in his boss's office that changed everything, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe to join our community of survivors. The invitation to move in with Thomas came 3 years after James, my husband of 40 years, passed away. The medical bills from his prolonged battle with cancer had drained our savings almost completely. I was struggling to make ends meet on my modest retirement income when Thomas, my 38-year-old son, offered what seemed like the perfect solution. "Mom, why are you killing yourself to maintain that big house? You should move in with Denise and me. We have plenty of room and it would be good for all of us," he said one Sunday afternoon as we sat in my kitchen surrounded by unpaid bills. I remember feeling a wave of relief wash over me. My son, the successful financial manager at Wilson & Brooks investment firm, wanted to take care of his aging mother. What could be more natural, more beautiful? "Are you sure, honey?" "I don't want to be a burden," I said, though inside I was already imagining how wonderful it would be to be close to family again. "Of course I'm sure. You took care of me for 18 years. It's my turn now." His words brought tears to my eyes. I sold my house within 2 months, putting the modest proceeds into a separate account Thomas suggested I open for emergency funds. I moved into their beautiful 2-story colonial in a prestigious Boston suburb with a heart full of gratitude and hope. The first few weeks were everything I had dreamed of. I had my own bedroom and bathroom on the first floor, allowing me privacy while still being part of the household. Thomas and Denise both worked long hours, so I happily took on many of the household chores. I cooked dinner most evenings, kept the house tidy, and even planted a small herb garden behind the kitchen. It felt good to be useful, to contribute to the household that had so generously taken me in. Our Sunday family dinners became a tradition. I would spend hours preparing Thomas's favorite childhood meals, and he would regale us with stories about his important clients and big deals at work. Denise, a sleek, polished woman who worked as a pharmaceutical sales representative, would add occasional comments about her own busy schedule. Looking back, I should have noticed the first warning signs. Thomas would sometimes critique my cooking, not maliciously, but with a certainty that his way was better. "Mom, this chicken is a bit dry. Next time try brining it first," he would say, or, "The potatoes need more salt. You always underseason everything." I accepted his criticisms with a smile, telling myself that cooking techniques had evolved since my day. After all, Thomas and Denise watched all those fancy cooking shows on television. Denise was less direct, but equally critical in her own way. She would rearrange the kitchen cabinets after I organized them, or redo the laundry I had folded, all without saying a word. When I offered to help with their annual summer garden party, she assigned me to the kitchen rather than allowing me to greet guests. "It's just that you don't know our friends, Mom Thomas," she said with a tight smile. "It would be awkward for everyone." I swallowed my hurt feelings and told myself it was just an adjustment period. We were 3 adults learning to live together, and there were bound to be some growing pains. The first real disaster came about 4 months after I moved in. I had prepared a special roast beef dinner to celebrate Thomas's promotion. I spent hours making sure everything was perfect, but just as we were sitting down to eat, Thomas carved into the roast and frowned. "Mom, this is completely overcooked." "It's practically leather," he said, his voice rising with each word. "I specifically told you I like it medium rare. This is embarrassing." The venom in his voice shocked me. Denise sat silently, eyes fixed on her plate, while Thomas continued to berate me in front of their dinner guests. I felt my face burning with shame as I apologized repeatedly, fighting back tears. Later that night, Thomas came to my room and apologized for his outburst, blaming it on stress at work. I forgave him, immediately relieved that he wasn't still angry and hopeful that things would improve. But something had shifted. I began second-guessing myself, constantly checking and rechecking recipes, afraid of making another mistake that would trigger Thomas's temper. I found myself thinking back to Thomas as a child, a sensitive, loving boy who would bring me dandelion bouquets and homemade cards. I struggled to reconcile that sweet child with the critical, sometimes harsh man he had become. Had I somehow failed him as a mother? Had I done something to create this angry, controlling adult? As the weeks passed, my confidence in even the simplest tasks began to erode. I had been a capable, independent woman all my life, raising a child largely on my own while working full-time as a nurse. Now I found myself paralyzed with anxiety over decisions as simple as what to prepare for dinner or how to load the dishwasher correctly. The happy retirement years I had envisioned were slipping away, replaced by a growing sense of dread and inadequacy. 6 months into our living arrangement, Thomas approached me with what he presented as a helpful suggestion. "Mom, I've been thinking. It doesn't make sense for you to worry about paying bills and managing your finances separately. Why don't I just handle everything? It would be more efficient that way." It seemed reasonable. Thomas was a financial manager after all. His expertise far exceeded mine when it came to investments and money management. Plus, I was contributing to household expenses, so consolidating made practical sense. "That sounds fine, honey. It would take a load off my mind," I agreed, not realizing I was handing over the last real piece of my independence. Within weeks, Thomas had established a new system. My Social Security checks and pension payments were deposited directly into an account he controlled. He paid my credit card bills, my health insurance premiums, and my small personal expenses. For daily spending, he provided me with a weekly allowance of $50 in cash. "Just keep receipts for everything, Mom." "It's for tax purposes," he explained when I questioned why I needed to account for every coffee or newspaper I purchased. The first time I pushed back against this arrangement was when I wanted to buy a birthday gift for my friend Susan. The silver bracelet cost $120 more than my weekly allowance. "I'll need to withdraw some extra money this week, Thomas." "I've found the perfect gift for Susan's 70th birthday," I told him one evening. His expression immediately darkened. $120 for a bracelet. That's excessive, Mom. Susan would be happy with a card. You need to be more careful with money at your age. You don't have an income anymore." "But Thomas, it's my money," I said, immediately regretting my words when I saw the cold anger flash in his eyes. "Your money? Who's housing you? Feeding you? Driving you to doctor's appointments? Do you have any idea how much it costs to maintain this lifestyle?" His voice remained eerily controlled, which somehow made it more frightening than if he had shouted. I backed down, immediately apologizing and agreeing that the bracelet was too expensive. Instead, I bought Susan a $15 scarf and told her the bracelet story over coffee, trying to make it sound amusing rather than disturbing. She didn't laugh. "Melanie, that doesn't sound right. Your son shouldn't be controlling your money like that," she said, her forehead creased with concern. "He's just trying to help me manage things I defended, though." A small voice inside me wondered if Susan was right. Around this time, I began to feel increasingly excluded from the household. Thomas and Denise would make plans without telling me, sometimes leaving me waiting with dinner prepared only to receive a text that they were eating out with friends. Decisions about the house were made without my input, despite my financial contributions. The most painful example came when I returned from a 3-day visit to my sister Carol to find my bedroom completely redecorated. My familiar quilt, the one James and I had received as a wedding gift, was gone. The photographs of my late husband, my parents, and my nursing school graduation had been removed from the walls. In their place were generic decorative items that matched Denise's preferred gray and white color scheme. "Where are my things?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, I packed them away in the attic," Denise replied casually. "This room has much better flow now, and it matches the rest of the house when we have company tour the place." When I tried to express my hurt feelings to Thomas that evening, he exploded. "We give you a roof over your head and you complain about decor. Do you know how entitled you sound right now? Denise spent her entire weekend making this place look presentable, and all you can do is criticize." His rage was so disproportionate to the situation that I found myself backing away physically, my heart racing. I apologized profusely, retreating to my newly redecorated room, where I quietly cried myself to sleep. After that incident, Thomas's criticism evolved into something more pervasive and cutting. He began commenting on my appearance, suggesting I was letting myself go. He questioned my memory when I was certain about facts or events, making me doubt my own recollections. When I mentioned people or activities from my past, he would roll his eyes or change the subject as if my life before moving in with them was irrelevant or boring. The first time Thomas exploded at me for having a visitor was when Susan dropped by unannounced one afternoon. We were having tea in the kitchen when Thomas came home early from work. The look on his face when he saw my friend sitting at his kitchen table made my blood run cold. He managed to maintain a veneer of politeness until Susan left, but the moment her car pulled away, he turned on me. "Don't you ever bring people into my house without permission again. Do you understand me? This isn't your home to invite whoever you want. You're a guest here." "But, Thomas, it was just Susan for tea," I stammered, shocked by his intensity. "I don't care if it was the Queen of England. This is my house, my rules. If you can't respect that, maybe this arrangement isn't working out." The threat was clear, and it terrified me. Where would I go if Thomas asked me to leave? I had almost no savings left, no home of my own. I was completely dependent on my son's goodwill. After that, I stopped inviting friends over. I made excuses to decline lunch invitations, gradually withdrawing from the social connections that had once sustained me. My world shrank to the four walls of Thomas and Denise's house, with occasional supervised outings to family events where I was expected to play the role of the happy, grateful mother. Some neighbors noticed the change in me. Martha from across the street stopped me one day when I was collecting the mail. "Melanie, is everything okay? We hardly see you anymore, and when we do, you seem different, quieter." I brushed off her concerns with a practiced smile. "Oh, I'm just getting older. Don't have the energy I used to have, and Thomas and Denise keep me busy with family things." Martha didn't look convinced, but I had become skilled at deflecting concern. My loyalty to Thomas, my unwillingness to admit what was happening, and my deep shame all combined to keep me silent. My health began to suffer under the constant stress. I developed insomnia, often lying awake until the early hours of the morning, reviewing interactions with Thomas and wondering what I could do differently to avoid triggering his anger. My blood pressure, normally well controlled, began to spike, concerning my doctor enough that she increased my medication. The most troubling development was the fear. I, who had faced down demanding doctors and dealt with life and death situations throughout my nursing career, found myself afraid of my own son. I would tense up when I heard his key in the lock, quickly assessing his mood from the sound of his footsteps or the way he set down his briefcase. On his bad days, I would make myself scarce retreating to my room or finding reasons to be busy in another part of the house. Where did I go wrong? I would ask myself in the dark of night. How did my sweet little boy turn into someone I'm afraid of? As months passed, I began to notice a pattern in Thomas's behavior. His worst outbursts typically occurred on evenings when he came home smelling faintly of alcohol. He would never drink in front of me, maintaining the fiction that he just had one social drink with clients, but the signs were there. Slightly slurred speech, more pronounced criticism, and an even shorter fuse than usual. The connection between his work stress and his treatment of me also became clear. If he had a difficult meeting or a deal fell through, I would bear the brunt of his frustration. I became the safe target for all his pent-up anger and disappointment. "You left the hall light on all day again." He might snap, his voice thick with contempt. "Do you have any idea what our electricity bill is like, or do you just not care because you're not paying it?" No explanation or apology was ever sufficient. Any attempt to defend myself would only escalate his anger, so I learned to simply absorb the verbal blows, to apologize, and try to make myself invisible until the storm passed. The most painful incident of public humiliation occurred at Thomas's birthday dinner. He had invited several colleagues and their spouses to an upscale restaurant downtown. I spent hours getting ready, wanting to make a good impression for my son's sake. I wore my best dress, a navy blue sheath that James had always said, brought out my eyes, and took extra care with my makeup and hair. At the restaurant, I was seated at the far end of the table, away from Thomas and Denise. Still, I made an effort to engage with the guests near me, sharing stories about my nursing days when they asked about my career. I was in the middle of describing a particularly challenging case when I heard Thomas's voice cut across the table. "Mom, nobody wants to hear about bedpans and dying patients at a birthday dinner. Read the room." The table fell silent. I felt every eye on me as my face burned with humiliation. One of the wives gave me a sympathetic glance, but no one dared contradict Thomas. I mumbled an apology, and stared at my plate for the remainder of the evening, speaking only when directly addressed. In the car ride home, Thomas berated me for embarrassing him in front of his colleagues. "You always have to make everything about you, don't you? I bring you to a nice dinner, introduce you to important people in my life, and you can't even behave appropriately." Denise sat silently in the passenger seat, her tacit approval of Thomas's treatment of me perhaps even more hurtful than his direct attacks. There were times I hoped she might intervene, speak up on my behalf, or at least offer some private comfort later, but she never did. In fact, she occasionally seemed to encourage his behavior, making small comments that would set him off, or bringing up topics she knew would trigger his criticism of me. As time went on, Thomas's control expanded to every aspect of my life. He questioned why I needed to leave the house so often, suggesting that at my age I should be slowing down. He insisted on knowing who I was calling when I used the house phone and why. He even began commenting on my clothing choices, telling me certain items were too young or inappropriate for a woman my age. When my old phone broke, Thomas replaced it with a new smartphone, presenting it as a generous gift. It was only later I realized he had installed tracking apps that allowed him to monitor my location, read my text messages, and see my internet browsing history. My privacy was completely violated, but when I gently questioned it, he dismissed my concerns. "It's for your safety, Mom. What if you fall or have a medical emergency when you're out alone? This way I can find you." The constant criticism and control took a devastating toll on my mental health. I, who had once been described by colleagues as confident and outgoing, became withdrawn and anxious. I second-guessed every decision, no matter how small. The voice in my head that questioned my worth, my intelligence, and my right to have opinions sounded increasingly like Thomas's. I often thought about how different my actual retirement was from what I had envisioned. James and I had talked about traveling, taking those road trips we never had time for when we were working. We planned to volunteer to spend more time with friends, to finally pursue hobbies we had put off. Instead, I found myself living like a prisoner, dependent on my son's moods and whims, gradually losing touch with the outside world and with my own identity. There was one particular comment from Thomas that cut deeper than all the others, a verbal wound that never fully healed. We were looking at old family photos one rainy Sunday afternoon, something I had suggested as a way to connect with positive memories. Thomas came across a picture of himself at about 10 years old, standing proudly beside his science fair project, his arm around my waist. "You know, Dad was the one who actually helped me build that," he said, his voice oddly flat. "You were always too busy with your job to be there for the important stuff." The unfairness of the accusation took my breath away. I had worked countless night shifts and weekends so Thomas could have music lessons, summer camps, and eventually college without crushing student loan debt. James had been a wonderful father, but I had been equally present and supportive, often sacrificing my own needs for my son's opportunities. "Thomas, that's not true. I was there for every science fair, every baseball game, every parent-teacher conference. I rearranged my nursing schedule constantly to be present for you." He looked at me with cold eyes I didn't recognize. "That's not how I remember it. But I guess your memory is getting pretty unreliable these days, isn't it?" That night I cried myself to sleep, mourning not just the rewriting of my history as a mother, but the loss of the close relationship I thought we had shared. What had happened to my son, or had I been blind to who he truly was all along? A month later, I made a desperate attempt to connect with Denise when Thomas was away on a business trip. I hoped that woman to woman, I might find some understanding or alliance. "Denise, I'm concerned about Thomas. He seems so angry all the time, especially with me. Has he always been this way? Was he like this before I moved in?" She looked up from her magazine, her expression unreadable. "Thomas works very hard to provide for us, Melanie. If he seems frustrated sometimes, maybe you should look at whether you're contributing to that stress rather than adding to it." Her response extinguished my last hope for an ally in that house. I was truly alone. My depression deepened. I lost weight, my clothes hanging loosely on my shrinking frame. I developed persistent headaches and digestive issues. When I looked in the mirror, I hardly recognized the pale, anxious woman staring back at me. During one of my regular medical checkups, Dr. Liang noticed bruises on my arms. They were from an incident where Thomas had grabbed me roughly when I dropped and broke an expensive vase, but I made excuses about bumping into furniture and being clumsy these days. Dr. Liang gave me a long look. "Melanie, I've been your doctor for 15 years. You can tell me if something's wrong at home." I couldn't bring myself to tell the truth, too ashamed to admit that my own son was mistreating me. Instead, I deflected with a practiced smile and changed the subject to my blood pressure medication. As Thomas's behavior worsened, I began keeping a secret journal hidden inside an old medical reference book on my bookshelf. I documented incidents, wrote down exact quotes, and noted dates and times. I wasn't sure why I was doing this, since I had no intention of showing it to anyone, but something in me needed to create an objective record, perhaps, to reassure myself that I wasn't imagining things or overreacting as Thomas often accused me of doing. It was around this time that I received an unexpected call from my daughter Katie. Katie and I had a complicated relationship. She had moved to California after college and maintained only sporadic contact. Our relationship had been strained since her teenage years, when she clashed frequently with her father. After James died, our phone calls became even less frequent. "Mom, is everything okay?" she asked without preamble when I answered the phone. "Of course, sweetheart. Why do you ask?" "I don't know. Something felt off the last time we talked. And when I called Thomas to check on you last week, he was weird about putting you on the phone, said you were having one of your confused days." The realization that Thomas was interfering with my relationship with Katie, possibly portraying me as mentally declining, sent a chill through me. But still, I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. "Oh, I had a migraine that day. You know how those make me fuzzy. Everything's fine, really." But as I hung up the phone, I wondered how much longer I could maintain the pretense that everything was fine. The walls were closing in and I was running out of air. The day that changed everything began like many others. Thomas had been particularly tense all week, snapping at me over minor issues like newspapers left on the coffee table or laundry not folded to his specifications. I knew from snippets of phone conversations I overheard that he was dealing with some kind of audit at work, adding extra pressure to his already stressed state. Denise had called to say she would be working late, so it would be just Thomas and me for dinner. I decided to make his favorite soup, a homemade chicken and wild rice recipe that had been a comfort food for him since childhood. I spent the afternoon carefully preparing it, simmering the chicken bones for hours, to make a rich stock, chopping vegetables into precise, even pieces, and measuring herbs exactly as the recipe called for. As I cooked, I found myself humming softly, something I rarely did anymore. There was something soothing about the familiar routine of preparing this particular meal, a connection to happier times when Thomas was young and our relationship was uncomplicated by adult tensions. I hoped the soup might soften his mood, remind him of those better days. I heard his key in the door at exactly 6:30. From the sound of his briefcase hitting the hall table with a sharp thud, I could tell it hadn't been a good day. Still, I put on a cheerful face as he entered the kitchen. "Hi, honey. I made your favorite soup for dinner," I said, my voice carefully modulated to sound upbeat but not too enthusiastic, which could irritate him if he was in a dark mood. Thomas grunted in response, loosening his tie as he slumped into his chair at the head of the table. I placed a steaming bowl of soup in front of him, along with fresh bread I had picked up from the bakery that morning. I sat down across from him with my own smaller portion, watching anxiously as he took his first spoonful. His reaction was immediate and violent. He spat the soup back into the bowl and slammed his spoon down with such force that soup splashed onto the tablecloth. "What the hell is this? It's completely bland. Did you forget the salt? Or are you trying to kill me with your terrible cooking?" I thought I added salt," I stammered, genuinely confused. I was certain I had seasoned the soup properly. "Maybe not enough. I can add more." I reached for the salt shaker, but Thomas knocked it out of my hand. It flew across the room and shattered against the wall, sending salt and ceramic shards across the kitchen floor. "It's too late for that. You've ruined dinner like you ruin everything." What happened next occurred so quickly that it retains a dreamlike quality in my memory. Thomas stood up abruptly, his chair toppling backward. I instinctively raised my hands in a defensive gesture, but I was too slow. His open palm connected with my cheek with a crack that seemed to echo through the kitchen. The force of the blow knocked me sideways out of my chair, and I fell hard onto the tile floor. The physical pain was sharp and immediate, but it was nothing compared to the emotional shock. My son, my child, whom I had nursed through illnesses, comforted after nightmares, and loved unconditionally for 38 years, had struck me. The boundary that should never be crossed had been shattered as completely as the salt shaker on the floor. I lay there too, stunned, to move my hand pressed against my burning cheek. Thomas loomed over me, his face contorted with a rage that transformed him into someone I didn't recognize. "Look at you, pathetic. Get up and clean this mess. And make something else for dinner that's actually edible." With those words, he stepped over me, as if I were nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle, and walked out of the kitchen. I heard the television turn on in the living room, the normal sounds of an evening news program, creating a surreal backdrop to the violence that had just occurred. It took me several minutes to pull myself to my feet. My wrist throbbed where I had landed on it, and I could feel the side of my face swelling. More shocking than the physical pain was the emotional devastation. Something fundamental had broken between us, something that could never be repaired. I cleaned up the kitchen mechanically, picking up the broken shards of ceramic, wiping up the spilled soup, and mopping the floor. I made Thomas a sandwich, which I silently placed on the coffee table in front of him before retreating to my room. He didn't acknowledge me or the food. Later that night, I heard him come upstairs, brush his teeth, and go to bed as if nothing unusual had happened, as if he hadn't assaulted his elderly mother and left her crumpled on the kitchen floor. The normalcy of his bedtime routine was perhaps the most chilling aspect of the entire incident. With Denise away on her business trip, the house fell into an eerie silence. I sat on the edge of my bed trembling, trying to process what had happened and what it meant. I caught sight of myself in the mirror on my dresser and barely recognized the frightened woman with a red handprint blooming on her cheek and tears tracking silently down her face. My mind kept returning to Thomas as a baby, his tiny hand wrapped around my finger as I nursed him. Thomas as a kindergartner, proudly showing me a drawing he had made of our family. Thomas as a teenager, gangly and awkward, but with a gentle heart, helping an elderly neighbor mow her lawn without being asked. Where had that person gone? Had I somehow created this angry, violent man through some fundamental failure as a mother? These questions tormented me as I examined my injuries in the bathroom mirror behind a locked door, the cut on my lip where my tooth had caught it during the slap, the bruises forming on my wrist and hip from the fall, the red mark on my cheek that would surely turn into a bruise by morning. I ran cold water over a washcloth and pressed it gently against my face, wincing at the contact. As the cold seeped into my skin, a clarity began to form in my mind. "This isn't love," I whispered to my reflection. "This isn't family." For the first time, I allowed myself to name what was happening: elder abuse. As a nurse, I had seen it reported, it counseled families through it, and now I was living it at the hands of my own son. The realization was both devastating and strangely empowering. If I could name it, perhaps I could also escape it. But how I had no money of my own that I could access without Thomas's knowledge. I had nowhere to go. Most of my friends had drifted away during my isolation in Thomas's home. My sister Carol lived in a small one-bedroom apartment across the country. Katie was in California with her own family and problems. As I heard Thomas's gentle snores through the wall, sleeping peacefully after assaulting his mother, a slow simmering anger began to replace my shock and fear. How dare he treat me this way? How dare he sleep soundly while I sat awake, injured and terrified in my own home? For the first time in years, I allowed myself to consider a radical possibility: leaving. Not just fantasizing about it as a distant dream, but actually planning it as a concrete step I needed to take for my own survival. With this new resolve forming, I returned to my bedroom and silently opened my closet. Behind a stack of winter sweaters was my old nursing bag. Inside it, I kept my passport, my original Social Security card, and a few cherished photographs that I hadn't wanted Denise to store in the attic. I added my secret journal to the bag and pushed it back into its hiding place. It wasn't much of an escape plan, but it was a start. A tiny act of rebellion, of self-preservation. As dawn broke over the horizon, I made a promise to myself. Whatever happened next, I would not spend another night under this roof if Thomas ever raised a hand to me again. Somehow, I would find a way out. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because I woke to sunlight streaming through my curtains and the sound of Thomas moving around in the kitchen. For a moment, I lay perfectly still, hoping he would leave for work without seeking me out. but my hopes were dashed when I heard his footsteps approaching my door, followed by a sharp knock. "Mom, are you awake? I made coffee." His voice was casual, almost cheerful, as if the previous night's violence had never occurred. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and opened the door. Thomas stood there in his crisp business suit, a mug of coffee in his extended hand, and an ordinary smile on his face. Nothing in his expression acknowledged what had happened. It was as if we were living in parallel realities, one where he had struck me to the ground and another where we were simply mother and son sharing a normal morning. "Good morning," I said cautiously, accepting the coffee, while being careful not to let my sleeve ride up and reveal the bruises on my wrist. "Listen, I have an early meeting, so I can't stay for breakfast. But Denise is coming home for lunch today to check on some contractors. She'll be expecting you to be there." His tone was matter-of-fact, but there was an undercurrent of command that I had become attuned to over the months. "All right," I replied, trying to turn my face slightly so the bruise on my cheek wasn't as visible in the morning light. Thomas reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a small cosmetics bag. "Here. You might want to use this before Denise gets home." I stared at the bag, not comprehending at first. Then the awful understanding dawned on me. It was concealer, foundation, and powder, makeup to hide the evidence of his violence. "My wife is coming for lunch," he continued in a low voice. "She covers everything up and smiles. You should do the same." The calculated cruelty of his words hit me like a physical blow. Not only was he completely unremorseful about hitting me, but he expected me to participate in hiding the evidence. Even worse was the implication about Denise. Had he been physical with her too? Was she also covering bruises beneath her perfect makeup? "Thomas, about last night." I began needing some acknowledgement, some apology, however inadequate. "Last night was unfortunate," he cut me off. "But let's not make a bigger deal of it than at Island. You made a mistake with dinner. I was stressed about work. Things got heated. It happens in families." "You hit me," I said, the words coming out barely above a whisper. His expression hardened, a glimpse of the rage from the previous night flickering in his eyes. "Be careful, Mom. Remember our discussion about assisted living facilities. At your age, with your medical history, it wouldn't take much for a doctor to decide you need full-time care. Especially if there were concerns about your mental state, your memory. Think about that before you start making accusations." The threat was unmistakable. If I reported the abuse, he would claim I was confused, possibly suffering from dementia. Given his status in the community and my increasing isolation, who would believe me over him? "Now I've got to go. Don't forget to clean up before Denise gets home. First impressions matter." With those parting words and one last meaningful glance at the makeup bag in my hands, Thomas headed out the door. I heard him whistling as he walked to his car, the sound of someone without a care in the world. I sank down onto the edge of my bed, coffee forgotten, the makeup bag clutched in my trembling hands. The casualness of his threats, the complete lack of remorse, and the expectation that I would simply cover up his abuse and carry on as normal left me breathless with fear and grief. How had it come to this? How had my relationship with my son deteriorated to the point where he could strike me, threaten me, and then expect me to hide the evidence without question? I went to the bathroom and began the painful process of applying the makeup with shaking hands. The bruise on my cheek had indeed darkened overnight, a vivid purple against my pale skin. The cut on my lip was swollen, but could be explained away as a result of biting it accidentally. The wrist was harder to disguise, but a long-sleeved cardigan would cover it. As I carefully dabbed concealer on my injured face, fighting back tears that would ruin the cosmetic mask I was creating, my cell phone rang. I almost didn't answer it, afraid it might be Thomas, calling with more instructions or threats. But when I saw Sarah's name on the screen, I felt a rush of relief. Sarah Johnson lived next door. She was in her early 60s, a retired social worker who had always been friendly but not intrusive. We occasionally exchanged pleasantries over the fence or when collecting mail, but Thomas had discouraged any deeper friendship from developing. "Melanie, it's Sarah from next door. I hope I'm not calling too early." "No, not at all," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just wanted to check if everything's okay over there. I heard some commotion last night, something breaking, and I was concerned." My heart raced. Someone had heard, someone knew something had happened. The wall of isolation Thomas had built around me suddenly had a small crack in it. "Oh, I just dropped a dish." "You know how clumsy I can be," I said automatically, the lie coming easily after so much practice. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Melanie, I heard voices too. Angry voices. And a sound that wasn't a dish breaking." My eyes filled with tears, but I remained silent, caught between the desperate desire to confide in someone and the fear of Thomas's threats. "I used to be a social worker specializing in elder abuse cases," Sarah continued gently. "I recognize the signs, Melanie. The way you've withdrawn over the past year, the way Thomas speaks to you when he thinks no one is listening, the way you flinch sometimes when he moves too quickly near you." Her words broke something open inside me. To have someone see what was happening, to name it without me having to find the words, was both terrifying and profoundly relieving. "I'm okay, really," I said, but my voice cracked on the last word, betraying me. "Would it be all right if I came over for a cup of coffee?" "Just to chat," Sarah asked. The question seemed casual, but I understood she was offering me a lifeline. I hesitated, thinking of Thomas's rules about visitors, of Denise coming home for lunch, of the threats about nursing homes. But something in me, some long-dormant instinct for self-preservation, made me say, yes, that would be nice. Thomas is at work and I could use the company. After hanging up, I finished applying the makeup, covering the visible evidence of the previous night's violence. But as I stared at my artificially flawless reflection, something hardened inside me. The fear was still there, but alongside it now was a growing resolve. I would not live like this forever. I could not. Sarah arrived 20 minutes later with a plate of muffins and a warmth that immediately put me at ease. We sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where Thomas had struck me hours earlier, but somehow Sarah's presence made it feel safer. We chatted about inconsequential things, at first gardening and the changing neighborhood, but then Sarah gently steered the conversation toward more personal matters. "Melanie, I don't want to overstep, but I'm worried about you. If there's anything going on that you want to talk about, I'm here to listen without judgment." I stared down at my coffee cup, turning it slowly between my hands. The moment stretched between us, filled with possibility and danger. To speak would be to make real what had been happening, to admit to myself and someone else the terrible truth of my situation. But to remain silent would be to accept it, to surrender to it completely. When my cell phone rang, interrupting the moment I nearly jumped out of my skin, it was Thomas checking in, as he had taken to doing several times a day. "Hello," I answered, aware of Sarah watching me carefully. "Mom, just making sure you're getting the house ready for Denise. She'll be there around 12:30. "Yes, everything's fine," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Who's that I hear in the background?" His tone immediately sharpened with suspicion. "Just the television," I lied, turning away from Sarah slightly. "Make sure the house is perfect. Denise has been stressed about this contractor's situation." After I hung up, Sarah's expression was knowing. That was Thomas. I nodded, suddenly exhausted by the weight of pretending. "Melanie, you don't have to tell me anything you're not comfortable sharing, but I want you to know that there are resources available if you're in a difficult situation. People who can help, places you can go." "I'm not sure what you mean," I said, still clinging to the facade that had become my protection. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "This is Lisa Goldberg. She's an elder abuse advocate I used to work with. She helps people in situations that might seem impossible to escape." As I stared at the card, Sarah gently reached across the table and took my hand. The sleeve of my cardigan rode up slightly, revealing the edge of the bruise on my wrist. I saw her notice it, but chose not to comment directly. "Whatever is happening, Melanie, it's not your fault, and you don't have to face it alone." Those simple words, spoken with such certainty and compassion, broke through the last of my resistance. Tears began to flow freely, ruining the careful makeup I had applied to hide my bruised face. "My son hit me last night," I whispered, the words hanging in the air between us. "Over soup that didn't have enough salt." Once I started talking, it was as if a dam had broken. The words poured out of me, the whole awful story of my gradual slide into dependency and abuse. Sarah listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or reaching out to squeeze my hand encouragingly. When I finished, she didn't offer empty platitudes or express shock. Instead, she asked the question that mattered most. "What do you want to do now, Melanie?" For the first time in years, someone was asking what I wanted rather than telling me what to do. The question itself was empowering. "I want to leave," I said the words, surprising me with their certainty. "But I don't know how. I don't have access to my money. I don't have anywhere to go." Sarah's smile was gentle, but determined. "Then let's figure it out together. But first we need to document your injuries and get you checked by a doctor. And we need to move quickly before Denise arrives for lunch." With those words, a plan began to take shape, a path forward out of the darkness I had been living in. And though I was terrified of what lay ahead and what Thomas might do when he discovered I was gone, I also felt something I hadn't experienced in a very long time: hope. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity and emotion. Sarah immediately called Lisa Goldberg, the elder abuse advocate, who agreed to meet us at an urgent care clinic near the local hospital. Before we left the house, Sarah insisted on taking photographs of my injuries, both with and without the makeup Thomas had provided. "Documentation is crucial," she explained, as she carefully photographed the bruise on my cheek, the cut on my lip, and the marks on my wrist and hip. "If you decide to press charges or seek a restraining order, these will be important evidence." The thought of taking legal action against my own son made my stomach clench with anxiety, but I didn't object. Deep down, I knew Sarah was right. What Thomas had done was not just morally wrong, but legally criminal. While Sarah continued documenting my injuries, I gathered a few essential items, my nursing bag, with important documents, medications, a change of clothes, and a few irreplaceable keepsakes, including the locket James had given me on our 20th anniversary, and a small photo album of Thomas and Katie as children. I left behind most of my possessions, understanding that things could be replaced, but my safety and dignity could not. Before leaving, I scribbled a brief note: Denise not feeling well. Gone to doctor. Will call later. Melanie. I left it on the kitchen counter, hoping it would buy me a few hours before Thomas realized I had truly left, not just stepped out temporarily. As Sarah drove me to the urgent care clinic, she made another call, this time to a domestic violence hotline. I listened as she explained my situation, emphasizing my age and financial dependency. "Elder abuse often intersects with domestic violence," she told me after hanging up. "The hotline can connect us with shelters that have experience with older adults and can provide specialized support." At the clinic, Dr. Warner, a compassionate woman in her 40s, examined me, thoroughly documenting each injury in my medical record. When she asked how I had sustained the bruises, I hesitated only briefly before telling her the truth. "My son hit me last night. He's been emotionally abusive for months, but this was the first time he became physically violent." Saying the words aloud to a medical professional made them impossible to deny or minimize. Dr. Warner's expression remained professionally neutral, but I saw the concern in her eyes. "I'm required by law to report suspected elder abuse," she explained gently. "Would you be comfortable speaking with a police officer about what happened?" An hour later, I found myself sitting across from Officer Ramirez, describing in halting detail the events of the previous night and the broader pattern of emotional and financial abuse that had preceded it. Lisa Goldberg, who had arrived midway through my medical examination, sat beside me, occasionally prompting me with gentle questions when I faltered. "Mrs. Patterson, based on what you've told me and the documented injuries, we have grounds to arrest your son for elder abuse and assault," Officer Ramirez said when I had finished my statement. "Would you like us to do that?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Despite everything, some part of me still struggled with the idea of Thomas being arrested, of being responsible for my own son facing criminal charges. What kind of mother does that to her child? Lisa seemed to sense my internal conflict. "Melanie, you're not responsible for the consequences of Thomas's actions. He made choices, and those choices were harmful and illegal. Holding him accountable isn't betraying him. It's allowing him to face the natural consequences of his behavior." I took a deep breath, remembering Thomas sleeping peacefully after hitting me, threatening me with a nursing home, and expecting me to cover up his abuse without question. "Yes," I said finally. "I want to press charges." With that decision made, things moved quickly. Lisa helped me file for an emergency protective order that would legally prevent Thomas from contacting me or coming near me. Officer Ramirez arranged for a police escort to help me retrieve more of my belongings from Thomas's house when the time was right. And most immediately, Lisa secured me a place at a transitional housing facility, specifically designed for older adults escaping abuse. "It's not perfect," she warned me as we drove to the facility. But it's safe and it's temporary. We'll work on finding you permanent housing that you can afford on your own." The mention of finances brought a fresh wave of anxiety. "I don't know how much money I have left," I admitted. "Thomas has been controlling all my accounts for over a year." Lisa's expression hardened slightly. "Financial exploitation is one of the most common forms of elder abuse. We'll need to get a financial affidavit and court order to access those records. If Thomas has been misusing your funds, that's another criminal charge." The transitional housing facility was a converted motel on the outskirts of town. My room was small but clean, with a single bed, a small table and chair, a mini refrigerator, and a private bathroom. After the tension of living in Thomas's house, the simplicity felt like a luxury. Here, no one would criticize how I arranged my few belongings or comment on my cooking or appearance. Here I could begin to remember who I was before the abuse. That evening, as I sat on the edge of my new bed, my phone rang. Thomas. I showed the screen to Lisa, who had stayed to help me settle in. "You don't have to answer," she said. "The protective order is in place. Any contact from him is a violation." I nodded and let the call go to voicemail. A minute later, a text message appeared. "Where are you, Denise? Found your note. Are you okay? Call me as soon as possible." The concern in his message might have seemed genuine to an outsider, but I recognized the controlling undertone. Thomas wasn't worried about my well-being, he was worried about losing control over me. More calls and texts followed throughout the evening, their tone evolving from concern to anger to threats as Thomas realized I wasn't coming back. I showed each message to Lisa, who documented them as violations of the protective order. The next morning brought a new development. Detective Clark, who had been assigned to my case, called with surprising news. "Mrs. Patterson, we've been investigating your son's finances as part of the financial exploitation aspect of your case. What we've found suggests that Thomas hasn't just been misappropriating your funds. There are irregularities in his work accounts as well. We believe he may have been embezzling from his employer." The revelation stunned me. Thomas had always been so proud of his professional reputation, his status as a trusted financial manager. Had his controlling behavior toward me been part of a larger pattern of dishonesty and manipulation? "We've contacted his employer, Wilson, and Brooks investment firm," Detective Clark continued. "They're conducting their own internal audit now and have asked Thomas to come in for a meeting with senior management this afternoon. I thought you should know because this might escalate his emotional state. We've increased patrols near the transitional housing facility as a precaution." I thanked the detective for the information, my mind reeling with this new perspective on my son's character. If Thomas had been stealing from his clients or employer, it explained his increasing stress and drinking his need to control every aspect of his home environment, and perhaps even his escalation to physical violence. Later that afternoon, Lisa arrived with news that connected all the pieces. "Melanie, I just got a call from Detective Clark. Thomas was arrested at his office about an hour ago." "For hitting me?" I asked, confused by the timing. "No, for embezzlement. Apparently the company audit found substantial evidence that he's been siphoning client funds for at least 2 years. When confronted by his boss, he apparently had some kind of breakdown. The police were already there because of the elder abuse investigation." "Was I there?" I asked, the words coming out before I could think better of them. Lisa looked confused. "Were you where?" "At his office. When he was arrested." "No, Melanie. You've been here with me all day. Why do you ask?" I explained about the thumbnail text that had been haunting me, the image of Thomas going white as a sheet upon seeing me at his workplace. Lisa's expression softened with understanding. The detective mentioned that when Thomas entered his boss's office, he did indeed go white as a sheet, but it was because the police were there waiting for him, along with company executives and their legal team. They had evidence of both the embezzlement and his abuse of you. It was the moment his carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. There was a strange symmetry to it all. Thomas had built his life on appearances, on maintaining the image of the successful businessman and dutiful son caring for his aging mother. Now, both aspects of that false identity had been exposed simultaneously. That evening, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered it. "Mom, it's me." Thomas's voice was barely recognizable, small and broken. "I'm at the county jail. They're saying I stole money, and that I hurt you. You know that's not true, right? You have to help me. Tell them it's all a misunderstanding. For a moment I felt the old pull of maternal obligation, the instinct to protect my child, regardless of his actions. But then I remembered the cold calculation in his eyes as he handed me makeup to cover my bruises, his casual threats about nursing homes, the years of subtle and not-so-subtle degradation. No, Thomas, I can't do that. What you did to me was wrong. What you did to your clients was wrong. I can't help you escape the consequences anymore. You ungrateful bitch, he hissed, his tone instantly transforming from pleading to venomous. After everything I've done for you, you'll regret this. No one will believe you over me. I ended the call, my hand shaking but my resolve stronger than ever. In that moment, I understood that Thomas's behavior wasn't my failure as a mother. It was his failure as a human being, a choice he had made to exploit and abuse, rather than to love and respect. The next day brought news that Denise had filed for separation, wanting to distance herself from Thomas's legal troubles. She had moved out of the house and was staying with her parents, refusing to post bail or hire an attorney for Thomas. Whatever loyalty or fear had kept her bound to him had apparently been severed by his arrest and the public exposure of his crimes. As I sat with Lisa reviewing options for permanent housing and the steps needed to regain control of my finances, I felt a complex mix of emotions: grief for the son. I thought I had relief at my escape from an abusive situation, anxiety about Trey, my uncertain future, and underneath it all, a growing sense of my own strength and resilience. You know, Lisa said as we finished our meeting, in my years of working with elder abuse survivors, I've noticed something. The moment they decide to take back their power, even in small ways, is often the moment their abuser's control begins to crumble. Your courage in leaving and pressing charges didn't just save you, Melanie. It exposed Thomas's broader pattern of exploitation. You should be proud of that. Pride wasn't an emotion I had allowed myself to feel in a long time. Thomas had systematically undermined my confidence, my sense of competence, my belief in my own perceptions. But sitting there planning my new independent life, I began to reclaim not just my safety and my finances, but my sense of self-worth. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be court proceedings, financial complications, emotional aftershocks, and the ongoing grief of losing my relationship with my son to his own destructive choices. But for the first time in years, I was walking that path on my own terms, with my head held high and my eyes open to both the challenges and the possibilities that awaited me. 6 months passed, like the turning of seasons each day, bringing small changes that accumulated into a transformation I could scarcely have imagined during those dark days in Thomas's house. I now have my own one-bedroom apartment in a senior living community, modest but unmistakably mine. The walls are painted a soft yellow I chose myself, decorated with artwork that speaks to my soul rather than matching someone else's color scheme. The legal proceedings against Thomas concluded with outcomes that brought mixed emotions. He accepted a plea deal for the embezzlement charges, receiving a 5-year sentence with possibility of parole after 3 years. For the elder abuse and assault charges, he was given a concurrent sentence, mandatory counseling, and a permanent restraining order, preventing him from contacting me. Through the dedicated work of a legal aid attorney specializing in elder financial abuse, I recovered most of my retirement savings. Thomas had indeed been siphoning money from my accounts, using it to cover personal expenses and gambling debts I never knew existed. The court ordered full restitution, though I know I may never see all of it. My physical injuries healed relatively quickly. The bruises faded, the cut on my lip became an almost imperceptible scar. The emotional wounds have taken longer to mend, and some may always remain tender to the touch. I still flinch sometimes at sudden movements or raised voices. Certain phrases that Thomas often used can trigger a rush of anxiety, but I've learned to recognize these reactions as normal responses to trauma, not weaknesses or flaws in my character. One of the most unexpected gifts of this painful journey has been the reconnection with my daughter, Katie. When she learned what had happened, she flew immediately from California to be with me. Our reunion was tearful, awkward at first, and then increasingly comfortable as we shared truths that had long gone unspoken between us. I always knew something was off with Thomas, she admitted, during one of our late-night conversations. Even when we were kids, he could be so manipulative, so good at making everything seem like someone else's fault. But I never imagined he would hurt you like this. Katie offered to have me move to California to live with her family, but I gently declined. As much as I treasured our renewed relationship, I needed to reclaim my independence, to prove to myself that I could build a life of my own choosing. We compromised with regular video calls and planned visits several times a year. The support group for elder abuse survivors that Lisa introduced me to has become a cornerstone of my recovery. Every Tuesday evening, I join a circle of men and women who understand without explanation the complex grief of being harmed by those who should have protected us, the shame that isn't ours to carry but somehow attaches itself to us. Anyway, and the courage required to start over later in life. In that circle, I found not just support but friendship. Georgia, an 82-year-old former professor whose grandson stole her life savings. Richard, a 74-year-old retired postal worker whose daughter kept him isolated and medicated to control his pension checks. Marion, 70, whose son's verbal abuse echoed Thomas's tactics almost exactly. Different stories, same patterns of power and control. Sarah, my neighbor whose intervention quite literally saved my life, has become my closest friend. We meet for coffee every Wednesday morning, take walks in the park when weather permits, and occasionally treat ourselves to dinner and a movie. She never says "I told you so" or questions why I stayed as long as I did. Instead, she celebrates each step forward, each small victory in my healing journey. My relationship with Sarah has helped me understand how much Thomas restricted my social connections, how deliberately he worked to isolate me from potential sources of support and perspective. Now I'm gradually rebuilding a network of friendships, reconnecting with former nursing colleagues, joining a book club at the local library, volunteering twice monthly at a community garden. The volunteer work has been particularly healing. 3 months ago, I began sharing my story with a local elder abuse prevention program, speaking to healthcare providers, social workers, and community groups about recognizing the warning signs. Each time I tell my story, it loses a bit of its power to shame me. Instead, it becomes a tool that might help someone else avoid or escape a similar situation. Processing my complex emotions about Thomas has been the most challenging aspect of recovery. A mother's love doesn't simply vanish even in the face of terrible betrayal. I've had to learn to hold two seemingly contradictory truths: I can love the child Thomas was, and mourn the relationship we should have had, while also acknowledging the man he became and protecting myself from his abuse. My therapist, Dr. Sharma, has helped me work through the crushing guilt that initially plagued me. Did I fail Thomas as a mother? Did I somehow create the conditions that allowed him to become an abuser? Through our sessions, I've come to understand that while I wasn't a perfect parent, no one island, Thomas made his own choices as an adult. His behavior reflected his character, not my parenting. I've also had to confront cultural and generational expectations about family loyalty that made it harder for me to recognize and leave the abusive situation. The belief that family matters should remain private, that a good mother would never expose her child's wrongdoing, that elder parents should be grateful for any care they receive from adult children. All these unspoken rules had kept me trapped in a dangerous situation far longer than was safe. One of the most significant moments in my healing journey came 3 months ago, when Thomas called from prison. Despite the restraining order, he had been able to place the call because I hadn't specifically added the prison phone system to the blocked list. His voice was the same blend of manipulation and entitlement I had come to recognize all too well. "Mom, I've been doing a lot of thinking in here. I know I made some mistakes, but I've changed. When I get out, things will be different between us. You'll see." In the past, I would have clung to those words, desperate to believe in the possibility of reconciliation. I would have accepted any crumb of remorse, any promise of change to restore my image of what our relationship should be. Instead, I took a deep breath and spoke my truth. "Thomas, I'm glad if you're doing some reflection on your choices, but I need you to understand something. I will not be in your life when you're released. The restraining order is permanent, and so are my boundaries. I wish you healing and growth, but it will happen separately from me." His response was predictable, a rapid shift from false contrition to rage and threats. But this time his words didn't devastate me. They simply confirmed that I had made the right decision for my own well-being. As I approach the 1-year anniversary of leaving Thomas's house, I can see how far I've come. I no longer doubt my own perceptions or apologize for taking up space in the world. I make decisions based on my own needs and preferences, not out of fear of criticism or punishment. I'm learning to trust my instincts again, to believe in my own competence and worth. The most profound lesson I've learned through this painful journey is that true family is defined not by blood or obligation, but by respect, mutuality, and love that empowers rather than diminishes. The family I'm building now, a chosen family of friends, support group members, and my reconnected relationship with Katie may not match the traditional image I once held dear, but it is far healthier and more nurturing than what I left behind. I still have difficult days. I still grieve for what was lost and what never was. But I no longer live in fear, and that freedom is worth every challenge of starting over at 67. If my story helps even one person recognize the warning signs of elder abuse, or find the courage to leave an abusive situation, then some meaning will have come from my suffering. To anyone watching who recognizes their own situation in my story, please know this: it is never too late to reclaim your dignity and your right to safety. There are people who will believe you resources that can help you, and a life waiting for you beyond the walls of abuse. The first step is the hardest, but you don't have to take it alone. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members to protect your well-being? What helped you find the strength to prioritize your own safety and happiness? Please share your experiences in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear these words. Remember that healing is not a straight line, but a journey of small steps forward, and sometimes the family we choose brings more healing than the family we were born into. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the courage to write the next chapter of your own.